Hello, everyone. This is Nicholas Lazaridis and
Your boy, Nick Pap.
the colorful commentary for this game day final match between George Pericleous and Nikolas Kyriakou.
And here we have an assortment of modern decks that we're sure are gonna surprise you in how differently they attack the metagame. So, on one hand, we have Hammer Time, the new quote-unquote best deck,
It's a fast combo deck that can grind people out with things like Urza's Saga and Pure Steel Paladin.
On the other corner, we have a completely different end of the spectrum. It's 4-color, good stuff control.
Nikolas Kyriakou comes up with just decks on his own most of the time that are a interesting spin on already existing archetypes, and this is no exception. He can be more controlling with elements like Snapcaster Mage and a lot of removal spells, but the expected control tools like Counter Magic is lacking in this deck, opting for more proactive threats like Omnaths and being more interactive with things like Teferi.
So Nikolas is taking a mulligan currently, but we can speak about George's opening hand, which contains an Ornithopter,
A Mem Knight,
an Esper Sentinel,
a Springlift Drum,
a Pure Steel Paladin,
a Plains,
and everyone's favorite land, Urza's Saga.
Kyriakou is trying to sort out his mulligan decision right now. Through the power of editing, we basically know what he's going to end up keeping. That is a Prismatic Ending,
An Expressive Iteration,
a Lightning Helix,
Snapcaster Mage,
Raw-Green Triumph,
and a Breathing Pool.
So we'll begin with a Plains and a Springleaf Drum from Pericleous.
And a Mem Knight, and an Ornithopter.
So this is very reminiscent to the older Affinity starts that can just dump out a bunch of their hands turn one. And Kyriakou is for sure going to have some trouble with this Esper Sentinel, especially with his being on the draw and more controlling type of deck.
We spoke with George about his deck specifically as he lays down Urza's Saga, and he mentioned Esper Sentinel as being his favorite card for Modern Horizons 2, at least until he can afford Ragavan. So that card's pretty good, folks.
Good cards demands a second one, I guess. So there's 2 Esper Sentinels on the board. So whenever Nikolas plays any non-creature card, George can draw 2 unless Kyriakou manages to pay 2. So unless that's like a gut shot, killing 1, paying 2, which sounds like a horrible play, then George is going to draw some cards.
And it's actually really important in this matchup because, as you can see, the Hammer deck can empty his hand very quickly, and the Sentinels help to refill it with more cheap spells that can be deployed for minimal resources in the player's turn.
Even if they run out of tools, things like Urza's Saga just take down, and then at some point will find some type of threat like the Hammer. Kyriakou here shocks himself to remove one of the Sentinels, paying 1. And I believe George here has missed a trigger from his second Sentinel to draw a card.
So that's mistake number 1 for those of you keeping track at home. Urza's Saga is currently at 2 counters, which means that it can make a construct, which would be a...
This point of 5/5?
5/5, indeed, as things stand. So George getting in for 2.
Keeping in little bits of chip pressure in the early game is a perfectly reasonable thing to do, especially with your bigger threats like the tokens from Urza's Saga or managing to equip a Hammer.
As we've neglected to mention also, there is a Lurrus lurking at the top of the screen on George's side. That is his companion and is also a pretty good addition to his deck that he can pick up whenever he wishes to do so.
Kyriakou here deals half the damage being dealt himself at this point just by his mana base, but does play out a Ren 6 to take care of the Esper Sentinel, paying to prevent that draw, while George is making a 4/4 construct at this point.
So he has essentially dealt with both Sentinels, well, his opponent should have drawn a card, really, but he hadn't, so it is what it is. as George uses the third mode of Urza Saga to fetch the eponymous hammer.
And here we have a Pure Steel Paladin, which, barring something else, is lethal. Swinging in for 10, 15?
16, I think? No, it was 15, yeah. Guy's a 5/5 plus 10 plus 10. He doesn't have flying. Very relevant. We do not unfortunately have deck lists currently, but we can speculate about what each player would bring in, because we can do that. So, against a deck like Hammer Time, artifact removal, obviously at premium.
From Kyriakou's side, which, having seen him perform in the rest of the tournament, he has brought a lot of wear and tears in his sideboard for a lot of the matchups, and especially for this one, both modes being relevant, being able to kill. Obviously a bunch of artifacts, but we also have two enchantments in the form of Urza Saga and Sigarda's Aid.
We would also like to point out that small spot removal spells like Lightning Bolt, Path to Exile, which are slightly on the downturn in Modern, but it is what it is, can also be useful in a pinch against this deck, as it can take out key cards like Stoneforge Mystic, Loras, Pure Steel Paladin, or a creature in response to a hammer activation.
Or even an equip from at instant speed with Sigarda's Aid. You can still respond to that.
On the other side, the options are not as clear, because generally it's a mono white deck. It does have the ability to play more than one color of cards, but the deck, as a quasi combo deck, can't really dilute its game plan that much. So the cards it brings in have to make a difference in order to be put in. In the control side, you can afford to bring in more situational cards, because you're going to see a lot more cards through draw, through a bit more filtering.
And yeah, this is where we wish we had deck lists to be able to see what each player's sideboard plan is. And maybe we can speculate a little bit on what they're bringing in or what they're taking out for the matchups. We do know that George is running Sanctifier Index in his sideboard. These are great for clearing out graveyards from red and black cards, useful for matchups like Dredge or the is it Blitz type of decks. But could also be brought here to remove some of those lightning bolts and lightning helixes from the graveyard, preventing any Snapcaster shenanigans. Other than that, we don't really have much good information on what he's bringing in. It didn't look like he brought in too many cards, maybe 3-4 cards. But we're gearing up here to see what their opening hands look like.
So, if we take a look, both players are going to keep their opening hands. They are satisfied with how they look. On the Hammer Time side, we have 2 Esper Sentinels.
And Springleaf Drum.
A Giver of Runes.
Sigarda's Aid.
Colossus Hammer.
And a single Plains as the only mana source.
On the other hand, 4-color control, which is on play for this game, has access to a Wear Tear,
an Expressive Iteration,
1 Snapcaster Mage,
2 Omnath Locus of Creation,
and 2 Windswept Heath. So, neither player being rich in mana currently, they both have 2 mana sources.
But George is threatening that turn 2 Colossus Hammer equip through the Plains, if he can manage to find a second source of mana.
We have also seen George in previous tournaments kill people on turn 2, which is a definite possibility with this deck. It's not, extremely common, but it happens sometimes. And you need to be generally aware that it is possible, but not with this start. He would require a 0 mana creature and the Sigarda's Age, which he has. Which is really the surprise performing card of this deck. Because, you see Sigarda's Aid came out during the Shadows over Innistrad block. It was a bit of a dud. Also a rare. Never the rare anyone was really happy to open. But now it seems to have found a good home in this deck. instant speed equip, or play, not equip really. So, very good card.
So the Esper Sentinel, again, is a great card to open up with because it really taxes your opponent or draws you some stuff. And George here would really like to draw some more cards, find that second source of mana. Kyriakou is taking some damage through the 2 fetch lands and that shock land right there. Looks like he's keeping up either a wear and tear or... Oh, there we go. He draws a Renin 6, which is the perfect answer for that... Did George forget to draw a card again?
No, he drew.
Okay.
He drew this time.
Learned from his mistake, but did find that land. So that Spring Leaf Drum is going to allow him to accelerate a little bit more, which is always going to be useful in this early part of the game. That Ren and 6 definitely, though, posing a bit of a problem, seeing as a lot of George's creatures have 1 toughness.
So George takes 1 here off his Silent Clearing, a nice addition to this deck, to play Giver of Runes, which very helpfully has 2 toughness. He does not actually, to our knowledge, run any black cards in his deck, so he's just using it as a way to draw cards. Any folks at home that would like to pick up this deck, you pretty much do the same thing if you play the Horizon Canopy or any other white land of this nature in your deck.
Yeah, we have Sunbaked Canyon as another option, which is, I think, the cheapest of the 3. Kyriakou here could have played a Fused Wear and Tear, but it looks like he is preferring to draw some cards with the Expressive Iteration, possibly missing a land drop. But that Lightning Bolt suggests that, oh yeah, of course, Ren 6 can buy back a land.
But he did find that Lightning Bolt, which is going to be pretty useful in taking out Giver of Runes. She ain't the original mom, but she's pretty damn good, folks, which is why it's a premium to kill her as soon as you can.
And killing her right now also has the added benefit of not allowing George to play an instant speed piece of equipment like the hammer to put up the toughness way above a Lightning Bolt range.
Or use the Springleaf Drum for an extra mana. George has run 2 lands off the top of his deck, so he is not limited by what he can do. We had seen him previously in this tournament having some issues, not a lot of issues. We should also mention that at this point in the tournament, George is 2-1, and Nikolas Kyriakou is 3-0, currently running the table. Some of us have played both these players in the tournament, going, better or worse.
Even though George is at a lower score overall, there's still a chance to win on tiebreakers. That is why this game is being played, of course.
In fact, the more interesting game, which we're not showing you because we can't, next to this was us 2 playing another game of Modern, but, we can't show you that, obviously, because who wants to see that? So here George has used the Stoneforge Mystic to fetch an equipment to his hand, which is a Colossus Hammer, statistically speaking.
And equips that Esper Sentinel right now to save that Sentinel from a downtick from Renin 6. Though we do see that Wear and Tear in Kyriakou's hand, which seems like a great opportunity here to get rid of both the Hammer, the Aid, and the downtick on the Renin 6 to kill off the Esper Sentinel. All seems like a great use of Kyriakou's turn, and uses all 4 of his mana, preventing that draw as well.
There is also an argument to waiting to do this on the other player's turn and instead using Ren to pick up a land from his graveyard. And that's an interesting play if he needs the land from his graveyard, if he doesn't have a 4th, for example. But even though it's instant speed, it's probably not the best idea in the world. His opponent... No, if he has a land in his hand, the opponent won't even draw a card.
Actually, yeah, I'm correcting that statement. He will draw a card because the Esper Sentinel doesn't ask you to pay 1. It asks you to pay X mana, where X is the power of the Sentinel.
Which, of course.
Having a hammer on him makes this a pretty tall order.
So George is basically going to draw cards regardless. unless
the players miss something here, but we will find out shortly.
so. Nikolas Kyriakou faces for one of his lone basics here. He is playing, I believe, one of each basic of the 4 colors in his deck, meaning he is a prime target for Blood Moon, Magus of the Moon, and any type of land hate you might encounter.
Clearly, though, a mono-white deck is not going to be running any Blood Moons. But for anybody else that might be thinking of ways to combat strategies such as the one Kyriakou was employing, then it looks like George has forgot to draw yet again.
No, he drew.
Did he draw?
He drew.
I must be missing it.
Let's give the devil his due. He drew his card here. The mistake counter remains at 1, folks.
Okay. If he did forget like 3 times, I must be the one being blind like twice. So,
yeah, we can use it to make fun of him afterwards.
Sure. So, did bring an untapped land. He could have brought in a shock land tapped, but he does want to leave up that Roger in Triumph, most likely for a lightning bolt or something like a prismatic ending, but it looks like it is a lightning bolt. So, notably, George doesn't draw a second time here because the Sentinel only triggers off of the first non-creature spell cast. But the other interesting piece of information is that the Ren upticked instead of downticked to kill that Esper Sentinel, signaling that possibly Kyriakou is missing land drops.
We should also note that it is a recent trend in Modern that control decks have stopped playing Path to Exile in favor of the more, a bit more reactive, let's say, prismatic ending.
It's a lot more useful for a lot more matchup. You're sacrificing instant speed, but you're gaining a lot more utility, being able to hit any permanent, basically, except lands, and not giving your opponent a land, obviously ramping them up. But George here is fighting back that Pure Steel Paladin, drawing him a card off of that second hammer being played and equipped on the Stoneforge Mystic. George opting to go for an attack on Kyriakou instead of killing that Renin 6. So if Kyriakou has a way to deal with these threats on the board right now, which, if I'm not mistaken, I think that is a Supreme Verdict in Kyriakou's hand, then Kyriakou is left with the only real value engine on the board, that being Renin 6, which is going to continue ticking up.
Obviously, a point of dichotomy between these decks, as we can see, is that George only has 1 card in his hand, and Nikolas Kyriakou has 6 cards in, 5, but multiple cards in hand. Supreme Verdict here, just back-breaking, clean 3 for 1, best threat left on the board. No way for any white player to deal with that for the most part. And the control player here, he's turned the corner, folks. He is
at 1, but a lot of aggro decks like Burn or other such aggressive decks do run Reach in the form of burn spells or other ways to deal non-combat points of damage. George's deck not one of those decks. There is another Pure Steel Paladin, again equipping to prevent a lightning bolt from killing the Paladin. But obviously no haste, so there is no attack at this point.
And Stoneforge Mystic, an excellent draw here.
Recuperates a little bit of card advantage,
which George can use to get a hammer. We don't think he's playing any other equipment.
He's likely playing a Shadow Spear in this deck as a one-off, but there is not much use for it right now. There is no threat on the other side to be a blocker, and there isn't much need. Plus, he can equip the equipment on both the Stoneforge and the Paladin to sort of diversify his attackers here.
Also, it should be noted that George cannot, by rule, play Batterskull or Cauldron Complete or any of the swords, as he is using Lurrus as his companion.
So here we go with the Omnath making his first appearance. One of the linchpins of this deck, basically the main reason to be 4-color. There's just so much value in this deck to run the Omnath. And here we see that Windswept Heath that Kyriakou ticked up the Red and 6 last turn, picked up the Windsweep from the yard, but did not play it, anticipating this play this turn to play the Omnath with a fetched land, so you can trigger both the gain life aspect of it as well as the add mana mode from Omnath. We're not sure what big play there could come out of this. There could be something like a Jace or a double removal spell. We do see a Prismatic Ending and a Snapcaster, and if a blue source is fetched, he can cast the Ending as well as a Lightning Bolt from the yard.
Or potentially he could also fetch for a white source and Ending twice, potentially.
True.
We haven't actually run the math, folks, but trust us, we're good at this.
Oh yeah, definitely a white source would allow double Prismatic Ending over here.
Which he could definitely use to get rid of both hammers and minimize the pressure he'd be facing. He shouldn't expect to find much in the form of removal from the Hammer Time deck. Some versions of the deck run Dispatch. I don't think George's version runs that, however.
And even if it did, he's unlikely to bring Dispatch in from the sideboard. It's not typically a main deck card and not a card that you would bring in versus a deck that runs like 6 creatures.
And half of them are Snapcaster Mages.
Yeah. Here we're both wrong. Instead, Kira was bringing a Forest instead of a blue or a white source.
Likely looking to massage his life total slightly.
Yeah, he is low. He is gaining some life out of that Omnath, but he's still not out of the woodwork quite yet.
He could have a Planeswalker ally he would like to deploy, like Teferi Time Raveler or Teferi Hero of Dominaria. Instead, he's going for the Ending here. On the Colossus Hammer, we're unsure what mana he used for it, but it was probably just the white. As the hammer has a converted mana cost of 1, but equips for 10 people.
Yeah, you're very unlikely to equip that hammer under normal circumstances with that equip cost. You're just usually using the Pure Steel Paladin or that Isengard Fantasy. And here we do see that Snapcaster Mage likely getting back a Lightning Bolt to kill the Paladin, because that is a way to recuperate some card advantage from George's side.
This doesn't mean that Nikolas Kyriakou is okay with having a Stoneforge with a hammer on it, but from his perspective, he has an Omnath. Snapcaster Mage has already served its purpose, so having a Stoneforge Mystic is really quite inconsequential, unless somehow George was able to find 2 removal spells in the same turn.
Yeah, here we do see that Lightning Bolt, and Snapcaster has fulfilled his purpose, but being a chump blocker at this point in the game is also very relevant, since George does not have any kind of evasion. And that run is continuing to tick up, possibly threatened to ultimate in 2 turns. And if he does, that is a lot of interaction in that graveyard for Nikolas Kyriakou.
Including a multitude of lightning bolts. From George's perspective, he's not in a great position here.
And we can see that by that sacrifice of the clearing to try and find some type of tool to help him fight out of this.
Of note, his deck does contain some Inkmoth Nexuses, which can fly over the top, as he attacks here and Snapcaster Mage says goodbye to the world and dies.
And those Inkmoth is, in fact, one of the few things that can actually have flying while equipped with a hammer, since you can activate the Inkmoth, equip with something like a Isengard Fantasy or a Pure Steel Paladin attack. The Inkmoth will not have flying, but if you reactivate it, it will regain flying, despite the hammer's text, due to some rule jargon that neither of us is particularly well equipped to explain right now, but just trust us, that's how it works.
Hey, I got that equipped. Some puns. I like that.
George would be proud.
So George here picks up the lures, because signifying that he pretty much doesn't have anything better to do with his turn. We can't actually see his graveyard, but you saw it before with us. There's plenty of good stuff in there. There's at least 1 Pure Steel Paladin he can use.
I think 1 hammer as well, and the Isengard Fantasy, which would be quite useful if he draws more equipment. Though the Pure Steel might be more relevant at this point. seeing as that hammer is stuck on that stone forge, and maybe equipping on a Lurus or something will prevent him from dying from burn damage, and also gain some life.
So here we see Expressive Iteration on the control side, a new card from Strixhaven that's shaping Modern by storm as well. 2 mana, you pretty much, if you play it on your third turn, you can have a land, you can have whatever you want, and you can just put a useless card on the bottom. So an excellent addition to decks like these.
It is a lot of the times 2 mana, select the better 2 cards from the top 3 cards of your deck. And we don't really see that power level in card selection effects in Magic anymore. Things like Preordain or Ponder, obviously those 1 mana being deemed too powerful for Modern, but things like Expressive Iteration coming out of recent standard legal sets seems to be doing quite a lot of work. That Run in 6, not interested in ultimating, instead opting to kill a Mem Knight.
That Omnath also cannot even think about getting in the red zone currently. It may seem that Omnath is consigned to chumping this turn, but we can assure you that Nikolas Kyriakou will probably have a plan. He even has a second one in his hand, so he can use it for this purpose if he wishes to.
We do see that wear and tear that could open up the possibility for a nice 2-for-1 here if George declares an attack with that Stoneforge Mystic. Kyriakou can simply block and then blow up the hammer and just eat the Stoneforge like nobody's business. Another interesting play is the fact that Kyriakou has played a fetch land, gain his 4 life, but not crack it. He can instead crack it in George's turn, gaining a further 4 life, bringing him further and further away from being dead, which is what George tried to do with that big attack, bringing him down to 1. Though that turn might seem like ages ago in George's eyes, especially seeing as he did not even get that Ren off the board.
In fact, if he goes to 12, he can even take the hit from the Stoneforge, as it currently has 11 power. Speaking of 11 power, here's a Shadow Spear, which we discussed earlier. This one is hard cast and not found via Saga. Or a Stoneforge Mystic, which George is going to use to get in for 12 points of damage.
And we do see that blowout that we were talking about earlier here, that attack in the wear aspect of wear and tear, blowing up that hammer, blocking. George is going to gain 2 life, but that hardly matters in this matchup.
And he is currently left with a lone Ornithopter facing this onslaught.
Double Spring Leaf Drum, not as relevant in turn like 10 or whatever we are at this point, as it is in the early game. Obviously, those are not doing too much, especially when your creature count is so low, just a lone Ornithopter.
So for our control player here, he takes 1 damage to fetch, but he gains 4 life off the Omnath, bringing him to a relatively cushy 11 life. He also fetches for a Triumph. We're not really sure which Triumph that is, because, extended art promos. Figure it out. Probably the Jeskai Triumph would be my guess.
I am unsure.
So
I think that's a green one. Anyway.
Omnath coming in the red zone here, signifying that the corner has been fully turned. It is statistically a very low possibility that Hammer Time will be able to win this game. But, you never know what happens. So we're going to keep you here, folks, to find out.
Plus, we rarely see George concede, even if the game is just seemingly impossible for him to win. He will make his opponent just finish him off. The opponent might make a mistake, or George could stitch together a victory out of the last few remaining tools that he might have. Though that we see here, that Shark Typhoon just being hard cast with plenty of tools in Kyriakou's hand. This will likely be the last turn of the game.
Here we see that Lurrus, with George having 2 mana at his disposal through the Springleaf Drums, meaning that he can use it to replay the Stoneforge Mystic and likely go for another hammer. So George using a Stoneforge Mystic here to fetch up his third hammer. We've lost count of the hammers, folks, as they're all in different zones right now. But this should be the fourth, and the Stoneforge Mystic draws an instant Lightning Helix, gaining the control player 3 life, making a 3/3 Shark. Here's another Lightning Helix, and as he typically does, Nikolas Kyriakou just goes through the motions and shows his opponent that he is dead. We would like to take this opportunity to thank our sponsor for this video, the Unbanned Splinter Twin Foundation. Why is Splinter Twin still banned in Modern? Unban it, you cowards. Thank you.
I'm not sure if I agree with that assessment of unbanning Splinter Twin, but seeing as a lot of decks in this format right now kill you on turn 3, maybe it might not be the worst idea. Plus, we have a lot more interaction these days.
So here we see George making some further tweaks to his deck. We really wish we could tell you what they were, but we're equally as blind as you are. Strategically, he's also not showing the camera because, further tournaments on. We might see you again at Nationals, folks. Who knows? This commentator pairing. So he has brought in 1 or 2 cards, I think. Nikolas Kyriakou has chosen not to make any further changes to his deck. He clearly likes the configuration going into Game 3, even though he will be on the draw for this game.
We really see the difference being on the draw and on the play. Being able to play that turn 2 Renin 6, to kill the turn 1 threat from the Hammer Time deck is just a great way to put you in the driver's seat. Obviously, that play not available once you're on the draw. Here we can start discussing a little bit about the player's hands. We do see that George is taking a mulligan to 6. And Kyriakou as well is going down to 6. We had a little bit of trouble deciphering what George's hand is. But we have managed to stitch together that he has an Ornithopter,
A Giver of Runes,
Stoneforge Mystic,
1 single Plains,
a Silent Clearing,
and Sanctifier on Vec,
which we have talked about previously. Kyriakou, though, has kept a Prismatic Ending,
a Lightning Bolt,
2 Renin 6s,
1 Mountain,
and a Stomping Ground. We do see a little bit of trouble with that mana base. No fetch land to go with the Renin 6 and no white source for that Prismatic Ending. But there is that painless source in the Mountain for that turn 1 Lightning Bolt.
Although him having 2 Renin 6s might be slightly problematic, because we've seen George having the attitude of just letting Renin 6 be, as opposed to attacking it. Interesting strategy, maybe not valuing the 2-mana Planeswalker as highly, or perhaps being more interested in just munching on his opponent's life total, really.
Though if we do see that Renin 6 coming down on turn 2 with no fetch lands, that might be even more reason for George to ignore it, seeing as it will not gain much value, especially if George does not have any 1 toughness creatures.
Perfectly reasonable. We can more or less stitch George's hand together by the information we have. Here we see both players mulliganing pretty quickly. In the famous words of Mike Flores, if you think about it for more than 3 seconds, you have to mulligan. Neither of these players thought about it. They chose to mulligan. So, Giver of Runes at Ornithopter, great plays on turn 1. Neither of which would potentially die to a Renin 6, although that's irrelevant because George is on the play, not the draw this game.
And Ornithopter unlikely to draw a Lightning Bolt from Kyriakou, but the Giver of Runes will most likely die to that staple removal spell in the modern format.
We also spoke a bit about Sanctifier and Vec and its interaction with the graveyards. It's not the best card in this matchup, folks. It's not as backbreaking as it would be against Dredge or a Prowess deck, but it still does have a role as it dodges Renin 6 activations. It also can attack through Omnath, it blocks Omnath, and it also cannot be Lightning Bolted or Lightning Helixed.
It can be bounced by a Thorfairy or killed with a board wipe, but Prismatic Ending also can kill it, seeing as it is only a white spell regardless of the amount of colors spent to cast it. So get out here trying to put something in his arsenal. No, that's the wrong game. Never mind.
We've clearly been playing too much Flesh and Blood, folks. You know, they're diversifying our stocks here. He has taken him a lot less time to decide what his card is, and I'm gonna count that as a misplay because George has completely failed at his opening hand, showing us as he leads off with a Giver of Runes and the Ornithopter we spoke
Giver
about.
of Runes making sense turn 1 to just have that activated ability ready to go turn 2. And there's really not much reason to not run out the Ornithopter, even though it won't do too much.
So here might seem like a mistake by Nikolas Kyriakou to not Lightning Bolt immediately, but unlike the older Mother of Runes, Giver of Runes cannot give protection to itself, meaning that if he chooses to bolt it right now, he'd be free to do so. It doesn't mean he can't bolt anything else, but he probably wasn't planning to do it anyway.
So that hammer comes out from the Stoneforge Mystic, which is the most common target, especially in the early game. And here we see that Lightning Bolt, leaving George with no attacker. Well, no consequential attacker anyway.
We've also not seen much of the Boogeyman in Urza's Saga in this matchup, which is slightly surprising. There's only been one played, and that was in Game 1, where it was used to fetch a hammer to great effect. Did not make an appearance Game 2, and we can't make any promises about Game 3 either, because we don't know.
So, get out here. If he had drawn a fetch land, that might not be the best play to do to run out that Venom 6. Even though he can't kill either of the threats on the board, he could still be open to hammer here. He still represents a Lightning Bolt that if George has something like a Sigarda's Aid, he could still kill the equipped target. But George only coming in for 1.
The instant speed ability of the Stoneforge to put the hammer in play, not particularly relevant for a couple of reasons. It's relevant, obviously, in the instant speed nature, but Sigarda's Aid means you can flash it in anyway, and there's no counter magic to be played around in the 4-color control deck, meaning that Stoneforge is basically just a squire at this point, and is being used for 1 damage.
It is a threat, though, and having seen the previous game, George did run out of threats at one point, so even some chip damage is relevant, and here we do see that Sanctifier coming to play, getting rid of that Lightning Bolt, relevant in case Kyriakou has something like a blue source for a Snapcaster into a Lightning Bolt. And also increasing the clock further with 2 more power on the board.
Power. Sanctifier being a 2-2, not a 2-1, meaning, well, it wouldn't die to run anyway, folks, but, you know, good to have that extra power and toughness.
Kyriakou is weighing up his options. It's unclear on whether or not he has found that 3rd land. If he has not, it will be quite difficult to draw out of this. And even an Expressive Iteration here does not do anything, since it's not castable. We need a blue source. One of the perils of playing 4-color decks, but it looks like there is a land coming into play, and it is a blue source, but enters tapped. Possibly no good spell that Kyriakou wants to cast right now with that blue mana.
And here we see Sanctifier and Vec actually being good, as that blue source could have been used in conjunction with a Snapcaster that we're pretty sure he has in his hand to play that Lightning Bolt. So, you know, sideboard options sometimes work out, sometimes they don't. But in this case, Sanctifier on Vec being quite good.
Here I'm experiencing deja vu, since I have said the exact same thing like 2 minutes ago. But we carry on.
We did say about copying your flow, so, you know, it works out. It works out. We're just enhancing the point for the folks at home that want to increase their modern knowledge here. So it might seem that Nikolas Kyriakou is in a bad spot, as he does not have any interaction he's playing. He doesn't have any counterspells, obviously. He's lacking in white mana, but he's not under a ton of pressure. And George does not currently, unless he plays it right now, have any method of deploying a hammer with the express intent of equipping it.
So here we see a second Mother of Runes, and a Steel Shaper's Gift is going
Steel
to
Shaper's Gift.
likely get a second hammer, or even the Shadow Spear that we've seen earlier, but I don't see much of a reason to get a Shadow Spear at this point. Yeah, and there we see a second hammer. Kyriakou could be having something like a Wear and Tear in hand, being able to kill an artifact though not relevant at this point since no big artifact threat is on the board.
And this is a play pattern we'll see often with a Hammer Time deck, in which they'll fetch up their hammers via Stoneforge Mystic and then just not cast them. That happens for two reasons. One, they're not vulnerable in your hand, well, unless you're facing Thoughtseizer or what's not. And also, they can be used with this Paladin later to draw a card, which is a nice way for the deck to provide some card advantage, as Nikolas Kyriakou plays his fourth land and, more significantly, a white source.
That important that he chooses to shock himself. It seems like that Prismatic Ending is going to take care of that Sanctifier. One of the few spot removals that Nikolas has to get rid of that new rare out of Modern Horizons 2.
Which we should also point out that, we didn't put a lot of respect on its name, but clearly he does, as he's chosen to get rid of it the first opportunity he has. He also passes with 2 mana open, which could represent, well, they can't represent a lot of things, but I don't know, Snapcaster Mage blocking at instant speed as an Ambush Viper. Although that Giver of Runes is now not summoning sick, which can be used for protection, as we see the Inkmoth Nexus we spoke of previously, which you're not going to see small chip attacks with the Inkmoth Nexus as often. It's going to be more of an all or nothing proposition. You're not going to see him attack for 1 every turn.
Yeah, it's not things like an Infect deck that just chips in for a little bit of Infect in the early game or just pumps everything up really quickly. The Inkmoth here is just as a vehicle to carry that hammer and kill somebody with 1 swing versus multiple swings from regular non-Infect creatures, and again has that ability to regain flying if activated a second time, even if it is equipped with that hammer.
So, George in the tank here, we're presuming in his main phase, although he could be in his combat step, and just waiting for Affirmation to continue. He chooses to pick up Lurrus instead, which is an interesting option here. We do know that his hand is currently 2 copies of Hammer, and his hand motions here indicating that he would rather not have attacked with the Giver of Runes and played something better, but it is what it is.
And it's an interesting thing to get Lurrus before attacking. I don't see much of a reason to do that, other than speed up the turn by a couple of seconds.
Are we going to consider this a mistake? Should we add to the count?
Sure.
Yeah, mistake number 2. Add that to the board.
Kyriakou has found some lands, though. Not missing any land drops, especially after keeping a 2-lander, is real important here. And it is also a second white source and a second blue source. This could facilitate things like a Supreme Verdict, or even a 3 cost to ferry into some type of interaction.
Also, notably, he still hasn't found any fetch lands for his Wrenn 6 to be very effective, as we see Snapcaster getting rid of the Giver of Runes, clearly respecting its possibility to hinder his removal in the late part of the game. And also, it blocks a Stoneforge Mystic, so why not?
And we see that Wrenn 6 not coming down. Kyriakou electing to keep that Wear and Tear active, because obviously there is an Inkmoth on the other side, and that could threaten a kill out of nowhere at any point if George finds a Sigarda's Aid.
George considering an attack here, and he is going to attack. There's no reason not to, folks. It's a free damage. Stoneforge Mystic obviously isn't blocking. Well, neither is Ornithopter, but you know what I mean.
Snapcaster could have traded there with the Stoneforge, but Kyriakou has other plans, it seems, for that Snapcaster. The Lurrus coming down, bring back a Mother of Runes. If George manages to untap with that Lurrus or that Mother of Runes, things could get out of hand as Kyriakou's removal spells become less and less effective.
He does find the fetch land here, and we'd also like to add 1 mistake counter to the booth. That is Giver of Runes, not Mother of Runes.
Well, the Daughter of Mother Runes, fair enough.
They have a connection. I don't know.
Punt 1 for me.
second cousin twice removed, or something like that. So that fetch land pretty much allows Nikolas Kyriakou to smooth out his mana base. He currently has 4 red sources, 2 blue sources, 2 white sources, but he only had 1 green source, so now he can get a second one. It does put his life total down to 8, though, which he's not in immediate danger, but that Lurrus, it might be an issue, especially if it starts attacking at some point for 3 damage.
We do see the Venom 6 pinging for 1, and the second Venom 6 finishing him off. So Nikolas Kyriakou is willing to dump 80 euros in the bin just to get rid of Allurus. Even though if the Allurus stayed in play, wouldn't have been extremely impactful, as not too many things were in the graveyard for George, most of them being exiled with prismatic huntings. But it's still something that you need to get rid of.
We should also note that George has no way of getting that Lurrus back once it's in the graveyard. The deck does not run any Unearth or other Reanimator effects. So that Lurrus is pretty dead. That Ornithopter has been there since turn 1 and has literally done nothing this game. So, it is what it is.
The amount of lands on George's side is slightly concerning. You rarely want to see that many lands out of an aggressive deck such as his.
We should note that while Inkmoth Nexus might not chip in for poison damage as much, it could be used to whittle down a Planeswalker like Ren 6 because it flies.
That Giver of Runes sticking around means that at least some of the threats will be protected from removal spells, or if they are blocked by that Snapcaster Mage.
Snapcaster Mage also fulfilling his duties as a 2-1 blocker there. We should give Nikolas Kyriakou negative points for using the ugly Snapcaster Mage and not the beautiful Tiago Chan art from Innistrad, which we're going back in a couple of months for 2 sets. So, get ready for your werewolves, your vamps, your spirits, and all that kind of good stuff, folks.
Maybe not a couple months, maybe like a couple of weeks. I think you're off a little
am
bit.
I off?
Right,
I don't know. It's not Tales of Wario. I've not been researching as much. So George used the Stoneforge Mystic to get the Shadow Spear, which he can use with the Inkmoth Nexus for 2 points in the air if he wants to. It ain't much, but 2 points is 2 points here. Or alternatively, he can also equip the Ornithopter, funnily enough. Let's see what he does. He will take a point down to 14. All the damage George has taken so far has been self-inflicted through his Silent Clearing. And equips Stoneforge Mystic, the one that's not summoning sick. I'm assuming he's attacking Ren 6 here. He is, and that means that it's threatening to kill.
So we do see that play like we did the previous game of blowing up the equipment before any damage is dealt, making this play not very relevant.
We should also note that Nikolas Kyriakou currently is down on cards in his hand. He has 1 card in his hand, which he just drew, which is unusual in a blue control deck, but his deck construction is more of a tap-out deck than a hold-up for counterspell deck, so it's not as unusual. We do see the Hammer Time player with more cards, though. That's slightly more unusual, but it is what it is. Ren and 6 finally being used to tick up and pick up a Flooded Strand from the graveyard. I believe that's the first up. Ooh, we do see Path to Exile here. He's using a nice path, so I'll give him that. So he is running Path to Exiles, but obviously it's not the 4 of it used to be.
Most likely a 1 over a 2 off in a sideboard, something like that, especially since the main deck is running a lot of cheap interaction, Lightning Bolt and Lightning Helix.
This does allow George to get a Plains, but we're pretty sure he'd rather have Giver of Runes instead.
So Kyriakou with no cards, we did not see any expressive iteration out of Kyriakou or things like an Omnath to redraw some cards. And those Ren 6s drew a card for the first time this past turn in that Flooded Strand.
So essentially both players here are playing the waiting game, as George needs to draw either the Sigard's Aid or the Pure Steel Paladin in order for him to equip his hammers at minimal cost, While Nikolas Kyriakou is really satisfied with anything except a land at this point. As we see an animated ink moth rumbling in the red zone. We're unsure if it's targeting Ren and 6. It is.
Yeah, this attack just signals that George wants to kill that Ren and 6. Just all out attack with everything.
And here we see his favorite card, Esper Sentinel. Perhaps not as relevant, because Nikolas Kyriakou already has...
Here's an interesting play. Kyriakou is fetching for a land to thin his deck. There is not much other reason to, but he could have kept the fetch land to play into drawing an Omnath and guaranteeing that land into play to gain the life in case the Omnath did not draw one off the top. But seems like Kyriakou is valuing more the thinning of his deck and getting a tap land into play without having to shock himself.
He also has his life total at 7, and while he's only facing 2 power, it's still fine. It's still a worry, but he does draw a Ren 6 here, takes care of that Sentinel, denies his opponent the ability to draw a card. Ren 6 will most likely be dying this turn, again with the same attack we saw last turn. And we should point out that that Ornithopter has been stone cold. Well, it's not anymore, but it has been useless so far.
But I mean, another Mana Source is useless. Oh, and there we do see that Omnath. That is a way for Kyriakou to try and turn this game around, depending on what this draw is. If it's a fetch land, he can gain 4 life now, crack it in George's turn, gain further 4 more life, but pass indicates that it is some piece of interaction, perhaps a second Omnath, or board wipe, something that is not particularly useful in this part of the game.
Omnath really making most of his draws good, as lands are okay and spells are obviously good. A second Omnath wouldn't be great, but... So, as we discussed earlier, here we see George not attacking with his single Nexi, perhaps being worried of some kind of removal, or not valuing getting in for poison as opposed to leaving it back.
Kyriakou was even getting in the red zone here. He figures that the pressure from George is inconsequential enough for him to ignore. And here we see George running out a hammer, potentially thinking of hard equipping. This is punished by exactly a play like this with Isengard's aid that he must have drawn this turn, preventing him from just equipping at instant speed since that hammer is no longer in his hand.
So we see he's probably going to go for the Infect kill here, animating both Nexi. He can also play a hammer from his hand.
If he has double hammer, though, that is lethal at this point.
We see a lightning bolt, and we see another lightning bolt, and that is the game. Both players choosing not to handshake, as, plague and stuff. A simple fist bump will do. So that's pretty much a study in patience, making sure that you carve your game plan, you don't go too fast, and also threat assessment from the more aggressive / combo player.
Here we can actually see what the players did elect to sideboard. We do see those wear and tears from Kyriakou and some timely reinforcements to get some blockers and some life gain.
Also pictured George complaining about not drawing enough for his Saga, despite the fact that he won. So, BM, dude. Python Needle, also useful as a method of kind of locking down Planeswalkers. And I believe that's a single prismatic ending, which I'm not really sure any prismatic endings.
Probably a Ren 6.
Using that cycle clearing and also the Springleaf Drums to produce more than one color of mana if required. On the other hand, we see 3 Wear Tears and 3 copies of Timely Reinforcements. While Timely is not as backbreaking as it would be against a Burn or Prowess deck, it would still provide the 6 life cushion and also some blockers.
So despite the finish of this match, George winning 2-1, the breakers went into Kyriakou's favor. So despite George winning the finals, Kyriakou was still the game day champion.
George ended up 3rd, and who was the Civilized Scholar that ended up 2nd?
Second? Oh, you were 2nd.
Of course, it was me, folks. Playing everyone's new favorite deck, Affinity. You can catch me every Friday doing that. So, we hope to see you.
Next time with Nationals, we're bringing more matches than just the finals.
And what's your excuse to not showing up to Modern FNM? Exactly, there is no excuse. We'll see you next time, folks.